Welcome to our podcast, People Matters. I'm Ollie McCann, Head of Employment Law at After Athena, and I'm joined today by my colleague Emma Andersen, an Associate Solicitor in the team. Today, we're going to take a look at some of the challenges facing the hospitality sector as an employer. Now, there is no doubt that the UK hospitality sector has a significant part to play in the UK economy. It acts as a major economic backbone, contributing over £60 billion to the UK economy and £54 billion in tax receipts for the Treasurer. Now, hospitality is also the third largest employer in the UK, employing over 2.8 million people, and is also in the top five employers within every single region of the UK. There is no doubt also that the hospitality sector provides valuable opportunities for younger people from all ethnic backgrounds, including foreign nationals, and can provide invaluable work experience for those workers in further and higher education, and in particular where they can learn key life skills whilst also providing rewarding careers. Yet the sector has faced and continues to face significant challenges. From the 2 years of the pandemic through to significant rises in energy costs following the Ukraine war, through to high rates of inflation. A report last year suggested that more than half of the UK job losses in 2024 and 2025 came from the hospitality sector, many attributing the increased costs associated with being an employer, exacerbated now by the removing of the business rates relief. Today, we wanted to take a look at some of the key issues we are seeing in the hospitality sector based on our work with employers in the sector, whilst also looking at what is coming around the corner. To be clear, if you are listening to this podcast and you aren't in hospitality, there are still things that we're going to talk about today that are entirely relevant for most employers. So, Emma, welcome. Let's start off with what you're seeing in the hospitality sector in terms of challenges and issues that they're facing.
Yeah, well, Ollie, as you mentioned, high staff turnover rates are always going to be an issue, but we're also seeing the repercussions of national minimum wage going up, national insurance contributions being increased, as you said, business rates relief, they're being removed, so that's a further financial burden for the employer, and jobs where there are high amounts of vacancies, like chefs, which were previously on access routes through skilled worker visas. They've been taken off those routes now. So again, as you referenced before, costs of energy, that has a direct impact on businesses. Their outgoings are increasing. So that means they need to consider what they're doing to be able to bring in more money, or they risk reducing the quality of the goods or the services that they're providing. And then we also have some add-ons about concerns with employers as well. So we're seeing places where they've got living accommodation, like if you've got people that live above pubs or on holiday parks, breaches in those when they've fallen foul of national minimum wage.
So, Emma, we'll just take a look at that in a bit more detail. Looking at the high turnover of staff. Now, some of the statistics I've seen suggest that staff turnover in the hospitality sector ranges from anything between 30% and 50% year on year. And that's been quite constant for many years running. Now, that's partly because of a young workforce who are
Mm,
either in education and moving on,
yeah.
or just more transient in nature. But what's the impact of this high staff turnover for employers in the hospitality sector?
Well, it's an abundance of issues. You have everything from the fact that they've got to recruit staff. So they're looking at not only having to go via agency routes where they're paying fees, but when they are onboarding these staff, they're having to train them, go through like the induction process. That has its own cost to the business as well. But you're also losing that quality of staff who've got experience. So the people that are carrying out the training, when they're going, then you're left with this vacuum of gaps in skills that are passed on to the staff. That also has a knock-on effect to management. Operationally, that adds on a strain. And that, again, knock-on effect of that is impact on team morale. So it's not just one issue, it's quite wide-reaching.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually. You mentioned the training. I was having a conversation with a client in the hospitality sector, employ around 400 plus people, and they have around 40% staff turnover. And when we're talking about the mandatory sexual harassment training that needs to be rolled out to employees and to new employees when they arrive, he was saying, well, if I have to sort of spend money on e-learning to deliver that
Yeah,
training sort of to every employee
yeah,
and then accounting for 40% attrition rates, and I'm getting an extra sort of 100 employees in every single year, the cost of that training is really significant
Yeah,
for them. So
really
they're like
adds
looking
up.
at other solutions and how they can deliver that training without having to keep spending money on the same training because of that attrition.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also looking at the challenges then in terms of retention of staff, what can employers do to try and retain staff?
Well, again, you can go back to your recruitment position. So, who are you hiring? Look at your model of staff, and we're not saying that, you want to hire everyone to be the exact same, of course not, but look for those qualities where you think people are going to really gel or might bring different things to the table that mean that you've got an inclusive, but also like a really wide ranging workforce that automatically when you've got a strong team that is a knock-on effect of positive morale. People are happy to go into it, they look forward to it, they want to do it. But also, you get an opportunity as well of looking at benefits that don't necessarily have huge financial impacts on your business. So, things like if you're doing an away day, team incentives, if you work in a bar or restaurant, do they get discount on if they come in and dine with you? Think about bonus schemes, incentive schemes, partner with other businesses in your area. Is there a gym that it operates 24 hours that they'll either do them a reduced or a free trial period membership for the business? There's other things that you can do that really create that positive, inclusive culture within your business that means staff want to stay. And again, if you've got someone who shows a real interest in hospitality, then you talk to them. How can you help them develop? How can they progress? What training initiatives can you bring in? Unfortunately, a lot of people do see hospitality as just a stopgap between something else, but there's absolutely, a vast range of opportunities within hospitality that can give people brilliant career options that mean they can travel. Those skills can be applied to other industries. So it's about marketing yourself as well. How can you sell that aspect of your business to these staff moving forward?
Yeah, so it's about employer brand,
Yeah.
sort of, and you say selling the benefits that come from the experience you gain within the hospitality
Yeah,
sector. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And it's interesting. My son worked in hospitality for many years, and
Mm,
he's actually recently left the hospitality sector. And one of his reasons being was that he was rotated week in, week out on sort of
yeah.
Fridays and Saturday nights,
Yeah.
and therefore he wasn't being able to spend time with his
No,
mates, etc.,
no.
or his family for that matter. And it got to the point where he just said enough was enough, and
Yeah.
he's exited the sector. What can employers do around rotas and stuff?
Well, try and be fair. So if you've got, I appreciate if you've got students or people who are in school or whatever, and they're only available evenings and weekends, there's not a lot you can do about that. But is there an option that you can alternate Fridays and Saturday nights between the staff, so you've not always got the same people working every Saturday? Do they get an opportunity to book off time? I mean, I know when I worked in hospitality, there was always that fight, wasn't there? If you knew that there was going to be a 21st or an 18th or whatever that weekend, there was always the fight to try and book it off first. So try and be fair, be between your staff and say, well, actually, you've had the last 2 Saturdays off. What can you do? That sort of transparency just really makes staff feel seen. It's not just always, oh, I'm going to have to quit because I'm never able to get out and see
Yeah.
anywhere. So it's a really easy fix in a lot of ways, and it means you're not losing good quality staff you've already invested the time and the money in the training, like you mentioned before.
Yeah, it's a completely valid point, and I think sticking with that issue, but linked to my son again as well, is you talked about career development
Mm,
and learning and development.
yeah,
Sort of that investment in the people. Again, so I think my son's experience was that that wasn't really happening. There was no real discussions taking place about how he can progress within the
yeah,
industry. What might his next step be? What does he need to achieve
yeah,
that? How can we help you
yeah,
achieve that? Delivering some extra training. There was just completely no discussion about it. He was just there to do a job
yeah,
and just treated well, but just as a worker and nothing
yeah.
more really. Ron, look at the bigger picture about, is this someone we want to keep within the organisation?
Yeah, and how disappointing is that? Because from both sides, you've got an individual there who's really keen and really willing and wants to learn. And the big thing about hospitality, and from my experience, definitely was there's so many opportunities. So you've got a much faster chance of progression. So if you're in an industry where you are struggling to keep staff, but you've got someone who's showing potential, it's not much. Just have a chat with them and say, you seem like you're really enjoying it. You're asking for more hours. What are your thoughts moving forward? Would you like to start running a lunchtime shift? Or, what are your considerations about things you might be more interested in? If you work in, a bar or a pub, would you like some specific training on ales or wine? that doesn't really cost the business a lot of money, but it's
Mm,
incredibly valuable to the individual that they feel seen and they've been given that bit of attention that just
yeah.
means that you're not just a number, you're not just a worker. You matter, and we want to invest in you the way that you're invested in us by choosing to work for us.
And I suppose the important point of that is, um, for large hospitality employers, they're going to be reliant on their managers to understand that concept and
Absolutely.
identify
Yeah.
the stars that they want to keep, and to have the tools and knowledge in terms of how to sort of bring those people on, really. So
Yeah, sure.
it's training the managers to be able to spot the opportunities to keep people within the business and to let them develop as well. So,
Yeah.
and sticking with the issue of labour and retention, I suppose, um, chefs, I mean, that's a bit of a
Yeah.
problem, isn't it, in
Yeah.
the hospitality industry? Every client I speak to say,
Yeah.
"We can't get hold
Can't
of
keep
chefs."
hold of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, what's the current position? I mean, obviously, we know, I think I read an article that suggested that 85% of UK hospitality businesses have a chef vacancy,
Yeah.
which highlights a significant problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And any solutions to this?
Well, I mean, I suppose when you are looking at the
Mm,
what's available, previously you could rely on wanting to recruit from outside of the UK. You know, you could look at doing that, but unfortunately those sponsorship routes have changed. There's different criteria. If there are specific, you know, if you are thinking about doing that, if you're recruiting you know, into your business, we've got a business immigration team who can obviously offer specific advice. But generally, when you're looking through those routes, where you know, you have sort of an opportunity to apply to work in the UK, you've got to be on that skilled list. Chefs were taken off, which a lot of ways it's really disappointing to do that, because again, it's almost undermining the profession. You've got individuals who are really skilled, have spent many years training, and we've got huge, you know, gaps in our recruitment within the UK. To me, it's so obvious that you've got a solution moving
mm,
forward. But I suppose from a more practical stance about what you're doing now, again, you know, chefs, it's notoriously long hours. So what are you doing to support and protect your staff? Let's try and keep hold of them. But also, I think it's really important to have that value from a staffing angle as well. You know, it's not just about the people that work front of house. You know, you're not going to be able to serve the food if you've not got the chefs to cook it. So are both sides of that integrated? Is it front and back of house? Are they
mm.
both, you know, working as one operation? What can you do about being, you know, more supportive in that, making sure everyone understands what they do? There are absolutely routes that you can do that are quite, like I say, quite practical solutions that don't have a massive financial impact on the business, but could be the key to you not losing your head chef to someone else who's offering to pay them £1 more an hour. If
Mm.
there's value there, the chef will hopefully want to stay. And if you're transparent as well about opportunities, if they listen, if you know, if you want to listen to them, if they want to develop the menu, if they want, if they're saying, actually, I've got a gap here, you know, what can I do, because you know, we need a pot wash or whatever this Saturday, and I've had to have, you know, my sous chef being on the pots because we're so understaffed. Can you fill that gap with an agency for a temporary measure? If it's going to keep a staff member happy, think about if a short-term solution would mean that individual feels listened to and valued, it's probably worth your time considering it.
Yeah, I think on the chef's point, I think with the removal of the chefs from the sponsorship list, I think
Mm.
the government's intention was to encourage UK employers to recruit from the UK.
Mm, mm.
I think the difficulty is that the way in which this has been introduced is that there hasn't really been a bedding period to give hospitality sector employers time to
No,
develop the skill set,
no,
to get people to the level they need to be a sous chef or a head chef,
yeah,
etc. So
yeah,
this has created this gap. So it's just a bit disappointing that the government haven't really consulted with the hospitality sector before
no.
sort of closing that door on bringing chefs in from abroad.
Yeah, no, definitely. And hopefully it's something they'll reconsider.
Yeah, yeah. Moving on to national minimum wage, that
Mm.
exciting topic.
Mm.
I certainly know that a lot of clients have been frustrated with what could be described as year-on-year significant national minimum wage
Yep,
increases, and
yep,
on top of that, we've also had the national insurance employer contribution increase as
yep.
well, which has
Big
contributed to the
jump.
financial pressures that hospitality sectors are seeing. What are, sort of, what's your view on all of this?
Well, you know, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do. You know, when you know clients come to us and they say, we've had these incredibly, big jumps in finances. What can we do? Well, that's the position. You don't want to fall foul of not paying someone national minimum wage because, you're opening yourself up to a whole load of claims. But, we really sympathise with our clients, particularly those who are in the hospitality sector because you're so labour reliant, really heavily labour reliant, and such a big portion of those individuals that work in the hospitality sector are aged between 16 and 24, and they've categorically seen the biggest jumps in the increases in your national minimum wage rates.
I think it was
And
8.5%, was it,
yeah, yeah,
for 18 to 20-year-olds?
yeah,
And
that's right. 8.5%, 18 to 20, 6% for under 18s and
yeah,
apprentices. So really, really big jumps. But you've also got the national insurance as well that's now being applied to even lower rate. So we're in a position where again, it's just another cost that the employer is looking to bear. And whilst, the automatic assumption with a lot of employers will be, well, we're just going to have to like whack our prices up, otherwise we can't look to keep on our staff. It is such a price sensitive culture. I mean, you've seen in the news, that you're always seeing that, individuals are saying, this is how much money we're making off selling a pint of beer, or this is how much money we're making off selling a meal. And you really are, they are counting the pennies. I mean, people used to eye roll, at Weatherspoons because they'd have a really specific price. It'd be like £1.94 or something for a pint. But that's because they said, when we break it down, that's like the minimum that we can charge to still make a profit. And you're seeing that cost industry,
mm,
across the industry now. The approach is what can we do to save costs because we don't want to compromise quality. I think we are, we're definitely seeing a change in hospitality now, certainly since COVID, where people seem to be choosing to eat out or drink less, but when they do want to go out, they really want to enjoy themselves. They want to invest their money and spend it somewhere nice. But you're in that real trap, aren't you, with rock and hard place as an employer between what's feasible for you to charge, because you also don't want to be so expensive people aren't going to want to come back and spend the money with you, are you? So it isn't easy at all. And that knock-on effect is, on the people that are spending the money as
mhm.
well. It's not just the individual that's employing people who work in hospitality. It's, it's me and you who go in and spend our hard-earned money there as well. We've also seen the effect that everyone else is feeling too. So it isn't easy at all. And like you mentioned, there has been a big jump. From April 26, national minimum wage over 21, 12.71 an hour. Now, that has followed two other quite steep increases over the last 2 years as well.
10% almost
Yeah.
each year, actually.
So it's not, these aren't little jumps, these aren't small increments. And, whilst we're looking at, a network of individuals that works, within the hospitality industry, as we mentioned before, about half of them 16 to 24, it is another blow. And I
Yeah.
don't think that there's a lot really, employers are left with options to circumvent that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, sort of most of the costs in hospitality are pretty much fixed. Um, you've got your business rates, you've got your property rates,
Yep.
you've got your labour intensive workforce. You can't rely on artificial intelligence necessarily to always serve
Yeah, that's the
people.
one
So
thing you can't.
finding efficiencies within the hospitality sector is really
Yeah, it
challenging.
is. Yeah.
Which means that they've got no choice. You either absorb the cost or you pass it on to the
Yeah.
customer, and then you're sort of hoping that the
Yeah.
customer can
You're rolling the
withstand
dice. Yeah.
that price increase. And with the
Yeah.
cost of living crisis, that's not
It's
always
not easy.
guaranteed. Hence the reason why we've probably seen some of the challenges, with employers going out of business or closing
Yeah.
down over the last sort of 18 months or more, really.
Yeah.
And the other thing that people forget about the national minimum wage is the knock-on effect, because it's not just those at national minimum wage level that get the price increase. Those above them who have more experience or have qualifications or
Yeah.
etc. think, well, hang on,
Yeah.
what's happening with me?
Yeah.
Sort of,
Absolutely.
I'm literally barely above national
What
minimum
they're,
wage,
yeah,
and yet I've got all this responsibility.
exactly.
I think I'll step down.
Well,
You
you
know, so,
would, wouldn't you? That'd go through your
so there's an
mind.
upward pressure
Yeah.
on
On
employers
businesses.
to
Yeah.
have to increase the pay for other people as well. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a domino effect,
It
really,
is.
which is probably not intended, but
No.
sort of is a consequence of these increases. Moving on. So, following on from the national minimum wage discussion there,
Mm.
one of the tools to control costs, I suppose, is using casual and zero-hour workers.
Yeah.
So obviously because the nature of the trade fluctuates from one day to another, from one part of the day to another part of the
Yeah.
day, employers in the sector need to sort of flex
Yeah.
their labour to
Yeah.
cover it. So hence the reason why we do get lots of 0 hour
Yeah.
workers, low hour workers, casual workers, etc.
Yeah.
But that comes with some challenges,
Yeah, of course
and
it
there are
does.
some planned changes coming ahead. Do you want to
Yeah.
just chat us through that, please, Emma?
Yeah. So as you said, within industries like hospitality or where you are employing individuals who do need more of like a fluid approach to work and arrangement, students, etc. That is been, it's been commonplace for years to have these casual zero worker contracts approach. And again, what's really, really helpful, I suppose, for an employer is you're able to have, some core staff that, work full time, part time, whatever, but the structured hours. And then, the staff that pick up the ebbs and flows. So busy summer periods, the pubs with the big beer gardens, Christmas time, if you've got, venues that host Christmas parties, things like that.
World Cup coming up.
World Cup,
Let's not
yeah,
forget that.
yeah, any big sporting
Yeah.
events. You're in a position where you're able to utilize those those workers on those contracts. And in a lot of ways it can work really well. But you've also got that layer as well of individuals who benefit from it because maybe they've got care responsibilities, maybe they look after a relative, or they like to be able to pick up shifts as and when because perhaps their partner works on a always changing rota, those sorts of arrangements. So there can be, a lot of benefits. And they can work really, really well in principle when you are following those sorts of fluctuations. But where I think you get issues are when businesses are masquerading employees, sorry, or workers saying that they are solely 0 hours, when in reality, they work every Friday and Saturday. They have done for years. They're the set hours. And they think when new things start getting a bit sour, well, actually, I'm not going to bother offering you shifts. That causes big problems for us.
I think we see that all the time, don't we? So we get that call.
Yeah.
I've got this person. They're on a casual contract. I'm just going to
Yeah.
let them go. Is that all right? Or
Yeah.
I'm not going to give them any hours because they're not entitled to any hours.
Yeah. That's what the
Just
contract
hang
says.
on a minute. Can we just have a
Yeah.
look at what they've been doing over the last 6
Exactly.
months or even 10 years? And it
Yeah.
turns out that they're pretty much full-time
Yeah.
staff. Yeah, that's a real problem, isn't it?
But they want to rely on the contracts. And, absolutely, as employment lawyers, of course, we want you to rely on your contracts. That's why we put so much emphasis on making sure your paper trail's there, make sure you've got your contracts in line, that they're compliant with the most recent legislation. Absolutely. But if in reality that working relationship isn't what it is, you can almost forget it. And you've just got to look at how that relationship status is genuinely defined by your day-to-day arrangements with them. And another point I always want to emphasize, just because a contract says 0 hours, it does not mean zero obligations. It doesn't mean you don't need to care about your staff. It doesn't mean that you don't need to consider what rights that they're automatically entitled to. So there's definitely pros and cons with 0 hours and casual hours, but where we always want to say, again, we're lawyers, we're always going to caveat whatever we say. Just proceed with caution. If something doesn't sit right with us when we're giving advice, we'll always dig a bit deeper. Do the same. Look at the reality of that working relationship. Just because that person says that they're, or you feel that they are 0 hours because that's what the contract says, look at the reality of it. And again, you've also got the position of, do you genuinely think that they've got the right to turn down those shifts? That's another push point, with 0 hours. Are they, as, within their right to say, no, I don't want it? Or if in reality, if you're rotoring them on, you're expecting them to come in on Saturday? Because again, that would be another trigger one that maybe they're not a 0 hours worker.
Yeah. I think sort of 0 hours casual workers, it's the right to sort of reject shifts, and the employer doesn't have an obligation to offer shifts either. But
No.
quite often we see that pattern of day in, day out, week
Yeah.
in, week out being rotated, and that sort of
It
alleged
doesn't add up.
kind of flexibility from both sides disappears over time, and it's
Yeah.
that actual expectation. And we know that the tribunals will look at the reality rather than
Of course they will.
what's on paper. And just on the subject of 0 hours and low hours, we've got the Employment Rights Bill
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah.
We've got some changes
Yeah.
in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Not
Big
necessarily this
changes.
year. I think next year, from
Yeah,
recollection, in
yeah,
2027.
2027.
You can just talk us through those changes, what it means for hospitality sectors.
Yeah, sure. So Employment Rights Act, obviously biggest mix up, biggest revelations for employment law that we've seen in a really, really long time. And the big one that's probably hit the headlines the most is those workers on 0 and low hours contracts have a right to guaranteed working hours. Now, whilst yes, that is what it means, and that is what the government's pushing through. They're saying essentially, you should be given the right not to be left high and dry. If you generally have regular work, but there's also a bit of a caveat if they want guaranteed hours, and I think that's really important because it again reflects the nature of that work and relationship. If you've got an individual who, in reality, will tell you on a Monday, I'm free to work next week or this weekend or whatever, and that's how you're rotating them in and that's how they're filling a gap. That's absolutely fine. That's a working relationship. But if you've got an individual, and again, this is where the government is looking to consult, so we hopefully will get some more guidance. How they're setting it out is if you're given shifts and then you're cancelled without sufficient notice, then you may be eligible for compensation. But again, we've not really been given any outline about what that compensation payment would look like. Is it full payment for the shift? And again, reasonable notice. How helpful is that?
Yeah. I mean,
But
if
fingers
this
crossed that'll
goes through,
build.
though, sort of number one, giving guaranteed hours
Yeah.
is difficult in a
It is.
sector
It
where you've
is.
got fluctuating
You
requirements,
do.
and add to that the risk of, well, we need to cancel a shift because a wedding's being cancelled or something. We don't need all these people on, and that happened at short notice.
Yeah.
And then you're going to get a charge
Yeah.
for
It's cost to
that.
you. Yeah.
It's a further cost for the employer to have to absorb,
Mm.
in addition to all the other costs we've just recently been talking about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think you mentioned there's a consultation currently
Yeah.
taking place around this with the government. So I
Mm-hmm.
think our message to UK hospitality employers is to try and get
Shout up.
involved. Speak to your
Definitely.
local MP, get
Yeah.
involved in the consultation, make your voice heard. Really,
Yeah.
if this is something you don't want to happen,
Mm.
we know that Labour do a U-turn.
Yeah.
It's happened recently a
Yeah.
few times.
We've seen it with
It's
day one
still
rights.
it's
Yeah.
still possible.
Yeah.
So make your voice heard and
It does.
speak
It
up
does make a
and
difference.
explain the difficulties and implications that this will have
Yeah.
for their business and the wider sector.
I mean, the reality is, if you're an employer who's already working on a really, really, really tight profit margin, you're going to, with this threat of having to pay compensation if you need to, cancel shifts, you're going to understaff your
Yeah.
business because you're going to think, I'm absolutely petrified of overstaffing and then being, stuck with a bill if, the party of
Mm,
30 that I booked in for the dinner cancels, what are you going to
yeah.
do? Again, then what's the knock on effect going to be to consumers? Are we all going to have to start paying daft deposits because the businesses can't afford to take the risk on you cancelling your table at the last minute? There's all these add-ons that come through, and you are right. This is the time to shout up. There are absolutely things that employers haven't been consulted on, and they haven't had a chance to sort of make their voices known. So where you do get an opportunity to do it, we really, really, really encourage it because from our point, like I say, we understand and we can sympathise that there aren't. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of routes for employers, but we're hopeful that by the government, if they are meaningfully consulting with these employers, they might be able to have a bit of input. And again, that means it could be more manageable for them.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't got any real detail on what the threshold of hours will be
No,
for
we
low
haven't.
hours,
No.
but I can see a scenario where this might actually result in employers deciding not to employ people on low hours, which some
Yeah.
people might actually want, and actually relying on truly casual staff, where
Mm.
they're almost like bank staff, and you don't offer them any shifts, but you offer them work at the last minute
Yeah.
to come in, which then doesn't actually improve the
Well,
situation.
no, what's the quality of your workforce? What are your training obligations? Are these people invested in your business? Do they care about what's going on internally? How hard is that to manage and to run? Because if they are bank staff and that is the true nature, they might say, no, it's bank holiday Sunday. I don't want to come in and work for you.
Yeah.
I don't have to. Then you're relying on agency staff. They come at a premium price. There's lots of knock-on effects that I don't think are always automatically considered with these situations. But it's also really different to and difficult to strategically plan when you're being almost threatened with, well, if you
Mm,
need to cancel a shift or you need to rearrange or you need to send someone home early, is that what an employer is going to be faced
yeah.
with?
Yeah. I mean, the way I see it is, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it.
Mm,
And it feels that this particular change is being done because of the minority of employers that might
Mm,
exploit people on low-hour contracts or zero-hour contracts, whereas the vast majority of
yeah.
employers actually welcome and appreciate those
Yeah.
staff and will always give them hours and give
Yeah.
them reasonable notice of shifts and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And they will never cancel off a whim. They'll cancel a shift because of a genuine issue.
Yeah.
And also they'll look to try and redeploy them elsewhere if there's opportunities. So
Yeah.
it does feel maybe a step too far.
It
But I
does.
suppose we are where we are, and the importance is to consult with the government. Just moving on to accommodation, because this is something that
Mm,
I come across
yeah.
quite a lot with your clients in the sector.
Yeah.
Um, we obviously have quite a lot of clients in the hospitality sector who offer live-in
Yeah.
arrangements,
Yeah, we do.
um, but that has some legal
It does.
risks and challenges.
Absolutely.
What are those?
Well, number one, the biggest one, as soon as a client mentions to you that they've got employees that, are on living accommodation of some sort, and, that can, go from living upstairs to living on like cottages on the grounds to living in static caravans, it's a whole wealth of it. What have you got in place? Do you have a license to occupy in place? If you don't get one, please seek advice. I could not encourage you more. Otherwise, you really are at risk that individual is creating a tenancy. So if, God forbid anything happens and you end up having to dismiss this member of staff, how are you getting this individual off your grounds? If you've created a tenancy legally, it's not straightforward and it's expensive.
Yeah, I had this very situation probably 4 or 5 years ago, pre-COVID, um, and it cost my client a shed load of money to get the individual out because they
I
didn't have
don't
that
doubt
license
it.
to occupy in place. And it's a straightforward document that can be
Yeah,
put in place. And our recommendation is that your contract of employment will cross-reference
yeah,
the license to occupy and vice versa. There'll
yeah,
be mutual references both ways, but within the license to occupy, there'll be clauses in there that give protection to the employer if the
yeah,
individual doesn't leave the premises, including them, the employee indemnifying for any costs of removal, etc., any
yeah.
cleanup costs, etc. So, the license to occupy is an absolute must if you've got living
Oh,
accommodation. The
definitely.
key thing is though that you need to satisfy the requirements for a license to occupy, which is that the living arrangement needs to be for the better performance of the duties. If it isn't for the better performance of the duties, then we need to explore, why are we offering them
Yeah.
accommodation, and sort of as to whether or not a tenancy is more appropriate and what that looks like.
Yeah. Is it a genuine
Yeah,
requirement?
yeah,
I think that's the tipping point, isn't
yeah,
it? And as long as you can satisfy that, I mean, you're fine. I mean, the other thing that we've seen a lot more recently that I do think it's good clients are a bit more alive to, living arrangements. So there's national minimum wage. Obviously, the big headlines at the minute are national minimum wage is going up. Absolutely. However, there is, when you've got living accommodation, an opportunity for you to almost deduct from that national minimum wage baseline a set figure. So as of April 25, it's £10.66 per day or 74.62 a week. That's what you can deduct. And if you charge anything more than that, deduct that from the national minimum wage, then you're at risk of paying below. You could set yourself up for a claim. Now, in some cases, you may be way within that if you pay them over and above the odds. But if you're ever unsure, obviously take advice because it's a really, really easy mistake to make when you think in your head, oh, but it's all right because, they're getting their board or whatever included. It's not necessarily that straightforward.
yeah, and actually, national minimum wage regulations, particularly around what's a deduction or not, is really
Oh, yeah,
complicated,
it's
and
not
how the rules
easy.
work is a bit bizarre to
Yeah.
the extent that I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about national minimum wage. That I actually think it makes sort of those sorts of at national minimum wage level poorer,
Yeah.
because it's actually directly having a negative impact on them in the way in which the rules work, and doesn't
Mm,
allow them to participate in salary sacrifice schemes, for example, because that
no,
would take
you're
them
right.
below. So
Yeah,
they're
it
paying
doesn't.
more, sort of in terms of tax and national insurance,
Yeah.
because they can't
Can't put it in
participate
the
in that.
pension.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But on
absolutely
the
agree.
accommodation front, I had a scenario sort of probably a couple of years ago with the hospitality clients, and they had separate lodges which they'd agreed to rent out to the employee at a very favourable rent against
Mm.
market value. We're talking about £200 to £300 a month cheaper than market rates.
Oh, wow.
And it's a direct relationship on a tenancy between the employee and the owner of the building, which happened to be also their employer.
Right.
But because they were the owner of the building and the employer of the individual, this still constituted providing accommodation and deduction from wages,
Yeah.
even though the two were totally separate arrangements.
Yeah.
It's the fact that we had that single point at the top: employer, tenant,
Yeah.
landlord,
Yeah.
and therefore it created a deduction from wages and brought them below the national wage, even though the employee
They were getting a massive
was
benefit.
miles better off
Yeah.
and couldn't afford to have got accommodation anywhere in that locality any
No.
cheaper. And that's just an example of how the national wage regulations are drafted in a way that, not intendedly, sort of that actually puts some people at a disadvantage.
Yeah, definitely. And an employer who's potentially trying to do something nice and with a very good
The,
intention ends up
Uh,
getting stung.
yeah, and the sad thing with that story is that sort of we sort of agreed with the employee that they had to move out, and we won't be we couldn't continue that relationship because it'll always be classed as a deduction, and because that was the case, the employee said, "Well, I've got no choice but to leave." So they
Yeah.
actually ended up losing their job because of this national wage issue, where actually everyone
Mm.
was happy with the arrangement,
Yeah.
but it contravened the legislations because of the way they're drafted.
And in reality, it's no one else's business normally how much they pay for
No,
rent or accommodation, is it? But it's just because it
no.
tips
They would
into
have been
this
spending that
employee
money
employer
on rent
relationship.
elsewhere. It's crazy.
Probably more.
Absolutely
Yeah.
crazy. So, anything else in terms of hospitality? I mean, what about tips?
Oh, tips, tips, tips. So, casting my mind back to 2 years, approximately 2 years ago, maybe a bit less, and we were going through the trenches of all the tipping legislation that brought through. Obviously, we've gone through it, so you don't have to, but essentially, the big ones, 100% of the tips should go to staff. I know in most industries they do anyway, but this was just making sure that, no money was going upstairs. And when we're in a position where you're divvying out the tips, so as I mentioned before, if you're working in like a bar or a restaurant and you've got the kitchen, it's now going to be distributed fairly as well between the departments. So rather than, 20% to the kitchen, 80% to the front of house staff, that's not how it's working. However, you do get an opportunity to set out how you class that as fair deduction, and there'll be new changes in legislation coming up where every 3 years the employer will be obligated to revise their policy on that as well. But it'll generally be a policy that they're required to have now that says this is how we divvy out the tips. If you've got any questions or concerns, you come and speak to us. Another point which I'm flagging because I think it would be assumed that this wouldn't come into place, agency workers fall within that definition as well.
Yeah,
So they're entitled to receive their share of tips and payment deadline. So now it's not, we save up all the tips and we give you one big pot at the end of a quarter or whatever. That isn't how it works. You've got to make sure that you're paying them no later than the following month in which the tips were
yeah,
received. And final one, which we touched on before, just transparency, making sure that when you are paying out the tips, the employers know how they're being paid out, how they're paid to them. And generally, as much as the lingo within the tip legislation refers to tranche and all that, the main point is you're just going to have someone who's manning the policy. It's their responsibility for the policy. It's their responsibility to understand how they're paid out. And if someone's got questions about that, then they know who to go to.
that's great. I mean, that's a really important message, that, and certainly reviewing that policy, making sure the systems are in place to pay on time, etc., is really important. One. I had a discussion not long actually back with another colleague, and we were talking about the risk of tip distribution, potentially falling into the traps of indirect sex discrimination.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You see
And
this a lot. Yeah.
yeah, and just because
Yeah.
in my experience, when they distribute tips, clients, particularly in restaurants or sort of bar stroke restaurants, they will sort of tend to give the kitchen staff a little bit more of a proportion than the front of house staff.
Mm.
But the issue is, if more women are
Oh,
front
at
of
the
house
front.
and
Yeah.
more of the men
Yeah.
are sort of kitchen, and then that's going to create a potential indirect discriminatory impact on women.
Definitely keep on top of it, keep it reviewed. I mean, there's a few ways that you can look at when you're doing your distribution as well. It doesn't always have to be a mathematical equation of, we received £100 worth of tips in 5 hours, so that's £20 to be split between every hour. You can take into account when were the busiest hours, what were people doing in that time. Have a look as well about staff that are on, if they've done a longer shift. Make sure that we're being really, really clear on how that's approached, because the other problem you're going to get is, as you know, indirect discrimination absolutely could be a factor, but you need to keep in mind that any concerns that are raised about the tips, if you're not divvying them out properly or clearly in line with your policy, you can get claims that are coming in £5,000 compensation. These aren't
Mm,
small figures that the individuals are entitled to, and it just shows that when the government brought in this legislation, they were serious about saying we want to make sure that, however, if there is any corruption within the industry and how they're being divvied out, we're serious about stopping it, and we want to make
mm.
sure it's fair and it's transparent, which is absolutely right. And just again, another point, it doesn't just apply to cash tips, it's everything on your card, it's all tips that go through that'll be within under that policy. But yeah, so it is one to, if you've not got a policy in place, get in touch with us, we'll help you out.
But the reality is, a policy sounds straightforward, but actually there are complications behind it by
Yeah,
ensuring that fairness and transparency,
yeah,
and keeping everyone happy, really.
yeah.
So,
Take into
yeah,
account how
yeah.
your business structure works,
Yeah,
definitely.
perfect. And just quickly, we touched upon accommodation and national wage breaches as a result of it. What other areas in the hospitality sector have we seen in terms of national wage breaches? Because this is becoming has been and remains a common problem.
Yeah, I mean, you have, like you said, accommodation. We've definitely touched on when you're not aware of birthdays of staff. So when they're encroached into that next layer. So you've got, like we said before, you have everyone from 16 and apprentices. You've got your 18 to 20s. You've got your 21 and over. Keep an eye on that. Even if it's an innocent mistake, it's still a national minimum wage breach. It can be a really really hefty, expensive risk if you're not doing that. Pension salary sacrifice, as we touched on
Yeah,
before. When you've got someone who's really, really eager about putting money away in the pension pot, great. We want you to do that. We want you to support it, but keep an eye on it. Same as well with if you've got internal processes for like holiday clubs, Christmas clubs, things like that. Make sure any of your benefits aren't encroaching into that. Paying for uniform, training, all these things, they all need to be
yeah.
taken into account when you're looking at national minimum wage. So it isn't straightforward. And like you said before, the guidance on it isn't always that clear. So if you do have a question and you think that, the guidance that you've got isn't helpful, you're always going to be better just to check in and ask with us.
Yeah, I think the uniform one is one that catches a lot of hospitality sector clients out.
Yeah.
Wagon
Been
Mama
in the
had it
news. Yeah.
in TGI
Yeah.
Fridays.
Yeah.
Simply the requirement for a sort of a waiting on member of staff to
Yeah.
wear black jeans
Yeah.
or black shoes is
Yeah.
deemed a uniform policy
Yeah.
or requirement, and then at that stage that results in a reduction in the national minimum wage and can result in liabilities. So if employers out there are unsure, please do take advice from the professionals. Emma, thank you for your contribution today. It's been much
Thanks.
appreciated. I mean, by way of conclusion, sort of it's quite clear that the sector has faced, significant challenges over the last 6 years and continues to do so. Further, these changes to zero-hour and low-hour worker rights is around notice for shifts, compensation for cancelled or curtailed shifts, and the change to unfair disposal rights is going to add more pressure and challenge for
Absolutely. Yeah.
employers. In fact, also the forthcoming change to unfair dismissal rights, given that normally we have transient staff in the hospitality sector and many staff leave before they get 2 years service,
Yeah.
soon they're
It's
going to
often
have
not a
unfair
problem. Yeah.
dismissal rights within 6 months. So that's going to be
Hmm.
an ongoing challenge for hospitality sectors as well. Um, but nevertheless, we've got to remember that as challenging as it is for hospitality sectors, there are professionals out there that can provide advice and support.
Yeah.
I think our key recommendation is be proactive and take advice.
Definitely.
Reactive, being reactive is more costly,
Yeah.
and more damaging.
Yeah.
And sort of just as importantly, it's important to review your living accommodation arrangements, review your uniform policy, review your holiday pay system because there's issues around not paying the right amount of holiday pay.
Yeah.
Explore ways of employee retention. Keeping staff is really key and could be a
Yeah.
really important benefit for the hospitality employer. Be proactive and get professional advice,
Yeah.
and don't sit on things. The worst thing
No.
to do is to sit on things and not get help when you need it. So, in conclusion, I hope that's been useful for our listeners and viewers. If any would like any support or advice on the Employment Rights Act or on how to manage issues within your organisation, then please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or any of my colleagues here at After Athena. Thank you.